The envelope was sitting on my dinner plate when I walked in. White, unsealed, my name typed across the front in a font I recognized from Gloria's label maker. I opened it standing up. Inside was a printed invoice. Morrison Family Properties, monthly rent. Due. $1,500. Tenant. Madeline Morrison. For the apartment I was already standing in. The apartment I'd bought with my own money 5 years ago. 8 people sat around the table watching me read it. Gloria's gold bracelet clinked against her wineglass. "Well," she said, "are we going to discuss this like adults?" I folded the invoice. I put it in my purse. And then I smiled, because I already knew what I was going to do. What I did next cost me my marriage. What I found after that cost Gloria everything. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. My name is Madeline, and I'm 33 years old. I grew up in the foster care system and worked my way through accounting school to become a CPA. 5 months into my marriage, my mother-in-law handed me a bill for the apartment I already owned. This is the story of what happened when she pushed the one person in the family who knows exactly where money goes. Drop a comment about whether you've ever had someone claim ownership over what's yours, and be sure to subscribe. I need to take you back a little. I lost my mother when I was 7. Car accident on I-85 outside Charlotte. A tractor-trailer crossed the median on a Tuesday morning and my mother's Civic didn't stand a chance. My father was a blank space on the birth certificate. So the state stepped in, and I entered the foster care system in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. 4 families in 11 years. None of them terrible. Most of them decent. None of them mine. The Hendersons had 3 other kids and not enough bedrooms. The Pucketts were kind, but moved to Virginia when I was 12 and couldn't take me across state lines. The Walshes lasted 2 years, the longest stretch, and Mrs. Walsh still sends me a card at Christmas. The Nguyens were my last placement. Good people, quiet house, a garden out back where I learned to like mornings. But foster care teaches you one lesson louder than all the others. Everything can be taken. Your room, your school, your toothbrush. The family portrait on the fridge gets updated and you're not in the new one. So you learn to hold what you can. You learn to keep something for yourself that no one else can sign away. When I aged out at 18, I had a duffel bag, a savings account with $1,400 from tutoring jobs, and a very clear understanding that no one was coming to help me build a life. I got a job at a tax preparation office on South Boulevard, enrolled at Central Piedmont Community College, and rented a room in a house with 3 other girls. That first morning, I made coffee in a kitchen where no one could relocate me. The smell of it, cheap grounds, paper filter, my own mug on my own counter, felt like the first thing I'd ever actually owned. I transferred to UNC Charlotte after 2 years. Accounting major. I picked it because numbers don't change their minds. A column either balances or it doesn't. There's no ambiguity, no committee vote on whether you did the work. I liked that. I liked it the way some people like deadbolts. My first boss at the firm, a mid-size practice on East Boulevard called Whitfield & Associates, was a woman named Lorraine Whitfield. 50, divorced, built the firm from a one-room office above a dry cleaner. She taught me everything the textbooks left out: how to read a balance sheet like a story, how to spot the paragraph where someone starts lying. And one thing that stuck harder than anything else: keep your assets separated, Madeline. The world takes from people who leave their doors unlocked. I passed the CPA exam at 26 on my first attempt. By 25, I'd saved enough. Years of overtime, a first-time buyer's grant from the city, and a discipline with money that bordered on compulsive, to buy my first condo. A 1-bedroom in Dilworth, just south of uptown Charlotte. I put it in an LLC, Calder Holdings. My birth name, before the system gave me a series of last names that never felt earned. At 28, I traded up within the same building. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a view of the tree line along East Boulevard, and 1 cracked terracotta tile by the front door. From the day I moved in alone, dropped my suitcase on the threshold and chipped the corner. I never fixed it. Every time I stepped on that tile, I remembered that I got here by myself. Nobody signed for me. Nobody co-signed. Nobody handed me a key because they felt generous. I met Derek Morrison at a Charlotte Hornets game. Mutual friends, cheap seats, a night where I almost didn't go because I had a client file due Monday. He was 32, worked in medical device sales, and had the kind of laugh that made strangers in the next row look over and smile. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to impress. He asked me what I did, and when I said forensic accounting, he said, "So you catch people who lie with numbers?" And I said, "Mostly, I catch people who think numbers don't talk." He laughed at that. I liked him right then. We dated for 14 months. He knew I'd grown up in foster care. He never treated it like baggage or a cause. He treated it like a fact about someone he was getting to know, the same way he treated the fact that I drank my coffee black and couldn't parallel park in one try. When he proposed, I said yes. When we talked about finances for the wedding, I told him I had my own savings and some property from before we met. He nodded. He didn't press. I didn't elaborate. One night, early in the marriage, he asked me why I kept separate bank accounts. We were in bed, and the question came softly, without accusation. I told him the truth, or part of it. I stopped needing a family to survive the day I turned 18. He laughed like it was a joke. I didn't. I loved Derek. I did. But I never gave him the combination to the safe, the login to the LLC, or the full picture of what I'd built before he showed up. The foster kid in me kept one hand on the exit at all times. I told myself it wasn't distrust. It was just the only way I knew how to love without going broke. I met Gloria Morrison for the first time at her house in South End. A well-kept two-story colonial with shutters she'd painted herself and a driveway she'd had repaved the summer before. Richard opened the door. He was 65, quiet-spoken, recently retired from 30 years as an insurance adjuster. He smiled, shook my hand, and offered me sweet tea before I'd even sat down. Gloria came in from the kitchen carrying a tray of deviled eggs and an expression I wouldn't fully understand until later. She looked at me the way a property manager looks at a new tenant, measuring what I might cost her. "So," she said, setting the tray down. "No parents at all?" It wasn't cruel exactly. There was curiosity in it. But the curiosity had teeth. I told her the short version. She nodded, then moved on to pouring iced tea, and her heavy gold bracelet clinked against the glass pitcher with every pour. It was thick, 18 karat, the kind of bracelet that doesn't bend. She wore it like a badge. I noticed she touched every surface in the house, the counter, the door frame, the edge of the credenza, like she was reminding each one who it belonged to. Gloria managed the Morrison family's rental properties, 6 units spread across Charlotte. Plaza Midwood, Noda, a duplex off Oakwood Avenue. She talked about them the way some people talk about their children. "We started with 2, she said, bracelet tapping the counter. "Now we're at 6. Richard and I built that." Richard, quiet in his recliner, smiled and said nothing. On our way out, Derek mentioned our address, the apartment in Dilworth. I saw Gloria's eyes narrow. Just briefly. Just enough. 2 months after the wedding, Gloria showed up at the apartment unannounced. She brought a housewarming gift, a framed Morrison family photograph, Gloria, Richard, Derek, and Paige, taken at someone's backyard graduation party. She hung it on the living room wall without asking, centering it above the couch like she was staking a flag. Then she walked through the apartment the way she'd walked through her own house, touching surfaces, opening cabinets, running her finger along the crown molding. "Derek, this place has good bones," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Reminds me of the unit on Park Road. As if my home were one of her rentals." Later, standing by the front door with her coat on, she dropped it. "Casual. Practiced. When your father and I set you 2 up here, I assumed you'd at least maintain the fixtures. Set us up here." I caught it. I didn't correct her in front of Derek because I wanted to understand the shape of what I was dealing with before I drew a line. But that night, after Derek fell asleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Mecklenburg County Tax Assessor's website. I typed in the address. The record loaded in seconds. Owner, Calder Holdings, LC. My name, my company, my property. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen, feeling the crack of the tile under my bare feet. Gloria hadn't checked. She assumed. She assumed Derek had found the apartment through her, because months before the wedding he'd asked her advice on neighborhoods. But I'd already found my own place years before Derek existed in my life. Gloria didn't know, because Gloria never asked. And I was beginning to understand that the things Gloria didn't ask about were the things Gloria assumed she already controlled. Sunday dinner. Gloria's dining room. The long oak table with the pendant light overhead. Me, Derek, Paige, Paige's 8-year-old daughter Lily, and Richard at the head. Gloria served pot roast and kept the conversation orbiting around property. The Park Road unit needed a new water heater, the No-Da duplex had a lease renewal coming, the market was shifting and rents needed to go up. She talked about it for 40 minutes straight. Richard ate quietly. Derek nodded along. Paige checked her phone. Then Gloria turned to me. She set her fork down carefully. She placed both hands flat on the table and her bracelet clinked once against the wood. You came with nothing, Madeline. Don't confuse generosity with entitlement. The table went silent. Lily looked up from her chicken. Paige's mouth twitched into something between a smirk and satisfaction. Richard cleared his throat but said nothing. Derek stared at his water glass like it held instructions. I picked up my napkin, wiped my mouth, and said, I appreciate the dinner, Gloria. That was all I gave her. She waited for more. I didn't offer it. The rest of the meal passed in the clink of silverware and the hum of Lily asking for seconds. In the car on the way home, Derek exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the pot roast. She didn't mean it like that, he said. I looked out the window. Yes, she did. He didn't respond. We drove the 25 minutes back to Dilworth in silence. I stepped on the cracked tile coming through the door and thought about how Gloria had walked through this same apartment 2 months ago, touching walls that weren't hers, hanging photographs of a family that treated me like furniture. Paige texted me on a Tuesday afternoon. Hey, do you own or rent? Just curious. Mom was asking. I read the message 3 times. Paige never texted me about anything unless she wanted something. I didn't answer. 2 days later, I was in the apartment hallway pulling my keys out when I heard Paige's voice through the stairwell. She was on the phone, standing near the mailboxes on the ground floor, and she didn't know the acoustics in that building carried straight up 3 flights. She won't say, Paige said. But I bet Derek's paying the mortgage. She probably doesn't even have credit. A pause. I know. A foster kid with a 2-bedroom in Dilworth? Come on, Mom. I stood there for a moment with my keys in my hand, listening to the shape of the story Gloria was building. Not just that I didn't belong, but that I couldn't possibly have earned what I had. Paige was the pipeline. Every visit, every casual question, every just stopping by, it fed back to Gloria. And I understood why. Paige was 37, divorced 2 years ago, living in a rented apartment in No-Da with her daughter. She'd lost her house in the split. She was watching her younger brother's wife, a foster kid with no family, no pedigree, no history, live in a nicer place than she could afford. That math didn't balance for her, and when numbers don't balance, Paige didn't investigate. She assumed fraud. Derek's take, when I mentioned it gently, Paige is just being Paige. In foster care, you learn to tell the difference between a family that wants you and a family that needs you to be less than them so they can feel like enough. That evening, I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop. I labeled the columns: date, property, source, amount. I didn't know yet what I was building, but my hands did. That spreadsheet sat open on my desktop for 3 weeks before I understood what I was looking at. If you've ever started preparing for something before you even knew what the fight was, if your gut told you to gather, to organize, to protect before your brain caught up, then you know exactly what I mean. Stay with me, because Gloria was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Gloria started visiting the apartment every week. She had reasons. She was checking the plumbing, or dropping off leftover stew, or bringing Derek a jacket he'd left at the house. But each visit was a territory check. She moved my coffee maker from the left side of the counter to the right. She replaced the hand towels in the bathroom with ones monogrammed M.M. Morrison. She left a note on the kitchen table once. The grout in the shower needs resealing. I'll call someone. As if she were the landlord. I moved everything back every time, quietly, without commentary. It became a ritual. Gloria rearranged, I restored. She pushed, I held. She never acknowledged the pattern, and neither did I. But we both understood exactly what it was. One afternoon I overheard her talking to Derek in the kitchen while I was in the bedroom. She wasn't whispering. "You need to get her to understand how this family works," she said. "Property is shared. Everyone contributes. It's how we've always done things." That evening, Derek sat next to me on the couch and delivered the message word for word, as if the idea had just occurred to him. "Mom thinks you should contribute to the family pool," he said, "like rent or something, for the apartment." I turned off the television. "We can't pay rent on my apartment, Derek." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is my apartment. I own it." He tilted his head. Not angry. Confused. Like I'd told him the sky was a different color than he remembered. "Mom said..." "Your mom said a lot of things. She didn't check any of them." He let the conversation end there, the way he always did, by not finishing it. Paige came by the following Saturday to pick up a jacket Lily had left during a visit. She stayed for 40 minutes. I watched her walk through the apartment slowly, pausing in the kitchen, running her hand along the granite countertop, opening the refrigerator like she was taking inventory. When I came around the corner, she was in the hallway photographing my kitchen with her phone. "Just showing Mom the cabinet layout," she said, lowering the phone like it was nothing. "She wants to copy it for the Park Road unit." She didn't look embarrassed. She looked entitled to it. I let it go. But while Paige was standing in my living room making small talk, I noticed her shoes. Scuffed. One sole peeling at the heel. Her jacket was from 2 seasons ago. Her nails were bitten down. Paige wasn't just bitter about my apartment. She was struggling. Her own place in Noda didn't have furniture in the second bedroom. I'd seen it when I dropped Lily off once. The divorce had stripped her down to the studs, and no one in the Morrison family talked about it. I tried. "Paige, I could help you with your tax return this year. Pro bono. It's what I do." She looked at me with an expression I'd seen before. In foster homes, in group meetings, in every room where someone who had less was offered something by someone who had more. "I don't need charity," she said, from someone who married into money. There it was. That was the narrative Gloria had seeded. Madeline married Derek for the Morrison portfolio. Madeline was the gold digger. Madeline, the girl from nowhere with no family and no name worth keeping, had latched onto the Morrisons for the ride. The story was clean and it was cruel, and the worst part was that Paige believed it. The call came on a Thursday. Gloria's voice, clipped and businesslike. "Sunday dinner. The whole family. We need to discuss household arrangements." She didn't ask. She summoned. Sunday arrived with the heavy, tight feeling of weather that hasn't broken yet. We pulled into Gloria's driveway at 5. Derek hadn't said much all day. When I asked if he knew what his mother wanted to discuss, he said, "Just family stuff," and looked at the steering wheel. Inside, the table was set for 8. Gloria and Richard, Derek and me, Paige and Lily, and 2 of Richard's cousins, William and Margaret, a retired couple from Lake Norman who came to every Morrison gathering like witnesses to a courtroom they didn't know they'd entered. Gloria stood at the head of the table. She was wearing the gold bracelet and a blouse I hadn't seen before. Pressed, structured, like she'd dressed for a board meeting. She opened a leather folder, took out a white envelope, slid it across the table to me with the tips of her fingers, the bracelet scraping lightly against the wood. "This has been overdue," she said, "but I wanted to handle it properly." I picked up the envelope. Inside was the same invoice I described at the beginning. "Morrison Family Properties, Monthly rent. Due, $1,500. Tenant, Madeline Morrison. A fake property ID number. A printed signature line at the bottom. All of it fabricated. Professionally formatted. The work of someone who had spent time making it look real. I read every line. Then I folded the invoice neatly, placed it inside my purse, and zipped the pocket closed. Gloria watched me do it. She expected tears, or anger, or a stammering defense. She got none of those things. She got a woman who had been receiving paperwork from institutions since she was 7 years old. I knew how to read a document, and I knew when one was a lie. Gloria addressed the table like she was chairing a homeowners association meeting. Madeline has been living in a Morrison family property for 5 months rent-free, she said. That's not how this family operates. Everybody contributes. Everybody earns their place. She looked around the room to make sure she had the floor. She did. Richard was watching his plate. William had paused mid-chew. Margaret's hand hovered over her water glass. Paige leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. Must be nice, Paige said, to marry up. The words landed like a slap. Nobody corrected her. Derek sat beside me and I could feel the heat coming off his face, but he didn't speak. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He studied his water glass like there might be answers in it. Gloria's bracelet clinked against the table. Once, twice, as she tapped the edge of her leather folder. Then she leaned forward and delivered the line that would stay in my chest for weeks. This is a family matter, she said. You're not family. You're a tenant. The word hit differently when she said it in front of the whole table. Tenant. Not daughter-in-law, not Madeline, not even Derek's wife. A tenant in a building she didn't own, paying rent to a woman who'd never signed a deed in her life. Richard coughed. William set down his fork. Margaret looked at her plate and didn't look up again. Lily, in the den watching cartoons, laughed at something on the television. The sound drifted in and hung over the silence like weather. I finished my dinner. Every bite. Then I folded my napkin, placed it on the table and said, I understand. I'll take care of it. Gloria's eyebrows rose. She hadn't expected compliance. She'd expected a fight. But compliance was never what I meant. And I think, in the back of her mind, she knew it. 2 days after the dinner, I drove to Gloria's house to pick up a casserole dish I'd left the week before. Gloria wasn't home. She was at a dentist appointment, Richard said, waving me inside. Dish is in the kitchen. Help yourself. I found it on the counter, washed and dried, set aside like Gloria had known I'd come for it. On the way back through the hallway, I passed the bathroom near Gloria's home office. The office door was ajar. I didn't go in. I want to be clear about that. I stood in the hallway holding a ceramic casserole dish, and I looked through a 6-inch gap in a half-open door. Gloria's desk was covered with papers. Filing cabinet open. Bank statements fanned across the surface. What caught my eye wasn't the mess. It was the letterhead. First National Credit Union. I knew the Morrisons banked at Wells Fargo. I'd seen the envelopes on Gloria's kitchen counter a dozen times, but this statement was from somewhere else. A second account. I couldn't read the numbers from the hallway, but I could see the shape of the page. Regular deposits, monthly, 4-figure amounts, stacked down the left column like a ledger. My accountant's brain filed it without my permission. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't know if it meant anything. But a second bank account at a different institution from the family's primary bank, that's the kind of detail that stays with you when numbers are your language. Found it, I called to Richard, lifting the dish. Thank you. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel and told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe Gloria had a personal savings account. Maybe it was old. Maybe I was seeing patterns where there were none. But the spreadsheet on my laptop was still open when I got home, and my fingers itched. I couldn't let it go. At my desk at Whitfield and Associates the next morning, I pulled up the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds website, property filings, tax assessor data. This was my native language. The Morrison Family Trust held 6 rental properties across Charlotte. Richard was listed as the sole trustee. That much was public record. What wasn't public, but what I'd already seen, was the trust's internal accounting. 2 months earlier, Richard had handed me a binder after Sunday dinner and asked if I could look over a tax question for him. "You're a CPA," he'd said, setting it on the kitchen table. "Maybe you can make sense of this." The binder held the trust's operating ledger, annual summaries, bank deposit records, property-by-property income logs going back 2 decades. I'd helped him with the tax question and handed it back. But I'm a forensic accountant. Numbers stay with me the way lyrics stay with musicians. I remembered the structure. And now, sitting at my desk with the public deed records in front of me, I cross-referenced what I'd seen. 4 of the 6 units had clean paper trails, rental income logged in the trust ledger, deposits into a Chase account listed under Morrison Family Trust, operating. Everything accounted for. 2 units didn't. The property at 1847 Elm Street, a 2-bedroom bungalow in Plaza Midwood, had no recorded rental income in Richard's ledger for the last 8 years. Neither did 412 Oakwood, a small unit near the Noda Arts District. But both properties were occupied. I drove past them on my lunch break. Lights on, a child's bicycle chained to the porch railing at Elm Street, a welcome mat, and potted herbs at Oakwood. The tenants were paying. The money was going somewhere. It just wasn't going into the trust. I sat at my desk and did the math. 2 units. Average combined rent of about $2,000 a month, based on comparable listings in those neighborhoods. 96 months. The estimate landed somewhere around $192,000 of rental income that had entered someone's pocket and never appeared in any trust document Richard had signed. My coffee sat untouched on my desk. It went cold for the first time in as long as I could remember. I didn't drink it. I just stared at the screen and understood, with the particular clarity that numbers give you when the story they're telling is ugly, that Gloria Morrison wasn't just controlling. She wasn't just rude. She wasn't just a difficult mother-in-law who hung photographs in apartments that weren't hers. Gloria Morrison was stealing from her own family. I went home that evening, stepped on the cracked tile, and stood in my kitchen for a long time without turning on the lights. The streetlight from East Boulevard came through the window and laid a stripe across the counter where my coffee maker sat. I made a cup. I held it but didn't drink. I was trying to decide what this meant for me. The fake rent invoice was one thing, petty, humiliating, manageable. I could fight it, or I could ignore it, and either way it would eventually become a bad anecdote at Thanksgiving dinners I no longer attended. But this was something else. If what I'd seen in Richard's trust ledger was accurate, and I'd spent 12 years learning to read these documents, so I knew the likelihood, then Gloria had been diverting close to $200,000 in rental income over 8 years. That money belonged to the trust. Which meant it belonged to Richard. It belonged, in some eventual sense, to Derek and Paige. And Gloria had taken it without telling any of them. I thought about Richard, sitting in his recliner, offering me seconds on Cobbler. Trusting his wife the way you trust the person who sleeps next to you. Completely, because the alternative is unbearable. He didn't know. I thought about Derek. Would he believe me if I told him? Or would he do what he always did? Find a way to frame it as me overreacting, me making things harder than they needed to be, me being the outsider who couldn't leave well enough alone? I put my coffee down. I wasn't going to react. I was going to verify. That's what CPAs do. We don't guess. We don't assume. We trace the money until the money tells us the truth. And then we decide what to do with it. At work the next day, I told Lorraine about the fake rent invoice. I didn't mention what I'd found about the trust accounts. That felt too large, too unstable, like picking up a wire before I knew whether it was live. I told her about the dinner, the envelope, the bracelet, the word tenant. Lorraine sat back in her chair and took off her reading glasses. That's not just rude, Madeline. That's fraud. Issuing a rent demand for property you don't own. That's actionable in North Carolina. She picked up her phone. I know someone. Nathan Howell, real estate attorney, office on West Trade Street in Uptown Charlotte. I met him on my lunch break. His office had leather chairs and framed bar admissions on the wall, and the particular stillness of a room where bad news was delivered professionally. I explained the situation. He listened, took notes, asked 3 questions. Did I have the original invoice? Was my ownership documented? Had Gloria ever been authorized to act as property manager for my unit? Yes. Yes. Absolutely not. You've got potential claims here, Nathan said. Possible fraudulent representation of ownership, unlawful rent demand. Depending on the specifics, it could be worth pursuing. He leaned forward. Do you want to proceed? I hesitated. Not because I doubted the case, because I was already thinking about something larger. Not yet, I said. Let me sit with it. Before I left, I asked one more question, not about the invoice. If someone were collecting rent on a trust property and not reporting it to the trustee, what would that be? Nathan paused. Breach of fiduciary duty. Possibly embezzlement, depending on intent. And almost certainly an IRS problem. Unreported income. I thanked him. I walked back to the office with the invoice in my purse and a question forming in my head that wouldn't leave. That evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the county assessor's page. The screen showed the deed to my apartment, Calder Holdings LLC, recorded and filed, clean as a church. Derek came in from the bedroom, stopped behind me, and looked at the screen over my shoulder. What are you doing? He asked. I didn't minimize the tab. Research. He leaned closer, saw the address, saw the county seal, saw the letters LLC. On our apartment? He said. Madeline, just pay the rent. It's $1,500. We can afford it. I closed the laptop slowly. We can't pay rent on my apartment, Derek. He crossed his arms, the same way his mother crossed hers. And the similarity stung us both, even if only I noticed it. What do you mean? Your apartment? I looked at him, straight on. I bought this condo 5 years ago, with my own savings. It's held by my LLC, Calder Holdings. My birth name. Your mother is charging me rent for a property I own. The silence in the kitchen was so complete I could hear the refrigerator compressor cycling. Derek stood there. He looked at the counter. He looked at the window. He looked at the cracked terracotta tile by the front door, the one he'd walked over every single day for 5 months without ever once asking what it was from. What LLC? He said. Calder Holdings. I registered it before we met. Another silence. Longer. Why didn't you tell me? You never asked. He stood in my kitchen, in my apartment, in a building I'd owned since before I knew his name, and I watched him try to process the idea that the woman he married had a whole floor beneath her that he'd never thought to look at. Derek didn't absorb it. He heard the words, but they slid off him the way water slides off something that's already sealed. Instead of sitting with what I'd told him, he picked up his phone. We need to tell my mom, he said. She needs to know she was wrong about the property. I watched him dial. And then what? I said. She apologizes? Takes back the invoice? What changes, Derek? He held up a finger. Wait. And put the phone on speaker. Gloria picked up on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, mid-task, like she'd been waiting for the call. Derek told her. He told her that the apartment was in my name, through an LLC, and that I'd purchased it before we were married. The silence on Gloria's end lasted 4 seconds. Then she said, That is ridiculous, Derek. She is lying. No foster kid has a condo LLC. She's manipulating you. I heard it. Derek heard it. He looked at me, and I saw something worse than disagreement in his eyes. I saw the pull, the gravitational field that had held him in orbit around his mother for 35 years, and I understood in that moment that no county record, no deed, no public filing was going to outweigh the voice on the other end of that phone. Gloria kept going. She needs to understand her place in this family. I want both of you at dinner Sunday. We'll sort this out properly. Derek hung up. He looked at me with the expression of a man standing between two buildings, trying to figure out which one would collapse first. "She wants us at dinner," he said. "Fine," I said. Clean and final, like a signature at the bottom of a document that couldn't be taken back. Monday through Wednesday, I worked late. At the office until 7, then home to my laptop until midnight. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot and fast and burns itself out. I was something colder. I was doing what I'd been trained to do for 12 years, following money. I called Richard on Monday evening and asked if I could borrow the trust binder again. Told him I'd noticed something in the tax filings that I wanted to double-check as a professional courtesy. He dropped it off at my office the next morning without a single question. That was Richard. Trusting to the point of vulnerability. I went through it page by page. The Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds confirmed the 6 properties. The NC Secretary of State's database confirmed the trust's registration. Tax assessor records gave me current valuations. Public record, all of it. But the trust's internal ledger, Richard's own accounting, told the real story. Gloria was listed nowhere on the trust documents. Not as a co-trustee, not as a beneficiary manager, not as anything. She had no legal role. But she handled everything: tenants, maintenance calls, lease renewals, deposit collection. Richard had given her the keys and never asked for a report. 4 of the 6 properties had clean trails in the ledger. Rent collected, deposited into the trust's Chase account, logged in the annual summaries. Numbers matched, columns balanced. 2 properties, 1847 Elm Street and 412 Oakwood, had nothing. No income logged, no deposits traced to the trust account. But both units had tenants. The Hendersons on Elm Street. Their name was on the mailbox when I'd driven past. The Carters on Oakwood. A neighbor had confirmed they'd been renting for years. Occupied. Paying monthly. I cross-referenced the rent amounts with comparable units in those neighborhoods. Conservative estimate, $1,200 a month on Elm Street. $800 on Oakwood. Combined, $2,000 a month. Over 8 years. Roughly $192,000. Nearly $200,000 that should have been in the trust's account and wasn't. It was somewhere else. And I had a very good idea where, because I'd seen the letterhead on Gloria's desk, and the shape of those deposits, and the monthly rhythm of income that had no corresponding entry on the other side of the ledger. Thursday night. Derek used my laptop to check his email while his phone was charging. I was in the shower. When I came out, he was sitting at the kitchen table with the screen open and his jaw set. "You're planning to sue my mother," he said. He'd seen the browser history. Tenant rights, landlord fraud, North Carolina. Fraudulent rent invoice, civil lawsuit. NC real estate attorney reviews. All from my research the week before. I stood in the doorway with a towel around my hair and didn't deny it. "Your mother issued a fraudulent document demanding payment for property she doesn't own," I said. "In my profession, that has a name. It's a piece of paper, Madeline. It's fraud." Derek stood up. He walked to the other side of the kitchen. He leaned on the counter and pressed both hands flat against the granite, the way his mother pressed hers on the dining table when she wanted the room to listen. "You're tearing this family apart over a piece of paper," he said. I took a breath. Held it. Let it go. "Your mother tore this apart when she called me a tenant in my own home." He didn't have an answer for that. He slept on the couch. I sat in the bedroom with the door closed, and I didn't look at Nathan Howell's business card on the nightstand. I looked at my spreadsheet. The columns were filling in. The numbers were shaping into a story that had nothing to do with a fake invoice and everything to do with where money goes when no one watches. The lawsuit was never my plan. The lawsuit was Gloria's assumption about what someone like me would do. React, litigate, fight on the field she expected. I was done fighting on anyone's field but my own. Gloria found out about the attorney. Derek told her. Of course he did. And Gloria didn't panic. She acted. Friday morning, a letter arrived at my apartment from the law office of Harold Brennan, the Morrison family's longtime attorney. "Dear Ms. Morrison," it read, Any legal action regarding Morrison family property disputes should be directed to this office. The Morrison family prefers to resolve internal matters privately. Boilerplate intimidation. I'd seen it 100 times in audit disputes. The corporate version of, "Don't embarrass us in public." Harold Brennan had been the Morrison family lawyer for 20 years. He played golf with Richard. He'd attended Derek's high school graduation. Filing a lawsuit against Gloria through Nathan Howell would mean going up against Harold Brennan, who would drag the case through motions and counterclaims for months, maybe years. The legal path was now expensive, slow, and exactly the kind of fight Gloria had prepared for. She expected a battle on her terms, in her arena, with her lawyer and her playbook. That's the thing about people who've controlled a family for decades. They build their defenses where they think the attack will come. Gloria had blocked the lawsuit, reinforced the walls, positioned her attorney. She felt safe. I sat at my kitchen counter and read the letter one more time. Then I set it down, poured a cup of coffee, and smiled. Because Gloria had spent a week building a fortress around the wrong building, the fake invoice was never going to be my weapon. It was never going to be the hill I chose. The hill I chose was the one Gloria didn't know existed. The one with the missing rent money and the credit union statements and a question she couldn't answer without incriminating herself. She thought I was coming through the front door. She didn't check the side entrance. Late Friday night. Derek was asleep on the couch again. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, the blue light of the screen reflected in my coffee, running one last check. I'd been tracking the timeline of Gloria's income diversion, trying to pinpoint when it started. Richard's ledger told the story. For the first 12 years of the trust's existence, all 6 properties reported income consistently. Then, in October 2018, the entries for 1,847 Elm Street stopped. 3 months later, 412 Oakwood went silent too. October 2018. I pulled up the calendar on my phone, scrolled through what I knew of the Morrison family history, and there it was. October 2018 was when Richard was hospitalized. Type 2 diabetes, a severe glucose spike that put him in Charlotte Medical Center for 11 days. Derek had mentioned it during our dating period. Dad had a health scare a few years back, but he's managing it now. Gloria started diverting the rent the same month her husband nearly died. I stared at the timeline. She wasn't stealing for jewelry. She wasn't funding a secret life. She was hoarding. Building a cushion. A woman who'd grown up in a trailer park in rural Georgia and married her way into stability was watching that stability crack, and she did the only thing she knew how to do. She grabbed what she could hold and hid it where no one could take it from her. I recognized the impulse. I carried it in my own bones. The difference was that I'd built my safety net with money I earned. Gloria built hers with money that belonged to her husband. My coffee had gone cold again. I made a new cup. This time, I drank it. Not because the weight had lifted, but because I'd decided what I was going to do, and I needed to be awake for it. Saturday morning, I sat on the edge of the bed with a legal pad and 3 options. Option 1, pursue the lawsuit over the fake invoice. Nathan Howell files. Harold Brennan responds. It goes to court. Gloria pays a fine, maybe. The family is embarrassed. Nothing fundamentally changes. Gloria keeps managing the properties. Richard never finds out about the missing rent. The lie stays buried, and I win a small, expensive, pointless battle. Option 2. Report Gloria to the IRS for unreported income. A federal investigation. Auditors. Subpoenas. Gloria potentially faces criminal charges. The family is destroyed. Richard's name is on the trust, which makes him liable too. Derek's inheritance evaporates in legal fees. A bomb that levels the building and buries everyone inside, including people who didn't do anything wrong. Option 3. Ask one question. At Sunday dinner. In front of Richard. And let the family decide what to do with the truth. I chose option 3 because it wasn't about punishment. It was about precision. Gloria's power in that family rested on one thing. Everyone trusted her with the money. Richard signed the trust documents. Gloria handled the operations. The arrangement worked because no one ever checked. Not because they were stupid, but because they loved her, and love is the world's most effective accounting loophole. If I sued, I'd win a case. If I reported her, I'd trigger a federal investigation. But if I asked one question, the right question, in the right room, in front of the right person, I could put the truth exactly where it belonged, in Richard's hands. I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in the truth getting to where it needed to go. Sunday dinner was 28 hours away. Saturday night. I printed one document, the Mecklenburg County deed showing Calder Holdings LLC as the recorded owner of the apartment at 1420 Dilworth Road. Not to wave around, not to make a scene. Just to have in my purse, in case Derek still couldn't bring himself to believe me without paper proof. I didn't print the financial analysis. I didn't need charts or spreadsheets or folders full of evidence. The numbers were in my head. 12 years of professional training meant I could recite the relevant figures the way a musician can hum a melody without sheet music. What I needed was one question. Just one. The right question, delivered calmly, directed at the right person, in a room where the answer couldn't be deflected or buried. I stood by the front door and pressed my bare foot against the cracked tile, the cool ceramic, the rough edge where the corner had chipped. This was the apartment I'd bought at 28 with my own money, from my own work, under my own name. No one co-signed. No one gifted me a down payment. No one set me up. I'd carried my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs alone, and I'd dropped it right here, and I'd chipped the tile, and I'd left it that way, on purpose. I called Lorraine. If things go badly tomorrow, can I stay at your place for a few days? She didn't ask what was happening. She didn't pry. She just said, "My guest room's got your name on it." Lorraine understood something about me that Derek never had. I didn't tell people my plans because my plans were the only thing no one had ever taken from me. I set my alarm for 7. I picked out a simple blouse, dark slacks, flat shoes. Nothing dramatic. I was going to dinner, not to war. The war was already over. Gloria just didn't know it yet. Sunday, 5 o'clock. Derek drove us to Gloria's house in silence. His hands were tight on the wheel, his jaw clenched, and the space between us felt wider than the 25-minute drive to South End. "Just hear her out," he said, 3 blocks from the house. "Maybe we can find a compromise." I looked at the dashboard. "There's no compromise on owning your own home, Derek." He pulled into the driveway. Same colonial, same shutters, same repaved driveway Gloria maintained like a monument. Inside, the table was set for 8. Same cast, Gloria at the head, Richard at the other end, Paige to Gloria's right, Lily in the den with a bowl of macaroni and a cartoon playing low. William and Margaret, Richard's cousins, were back, sitting beside each other with the patient, slightly wary expressions of people who'd been to enough Morrison dinners to know when one was going to go sideways. And there, in the center of the table, next to the breadbasket, a printed document, 2 copies, and a pen. Gloria stood when we walked in. She was wearing the gold bracelet. She was wearing a pressed navy dress. She was smiling with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from believing you've already won. "I've drawn up a proper lease," she said. Her bracelet clinked against the back of the chair. $1,500 a month, first and last up front. Let's make this official. She slid the copies toward me. I sat down. I picked up the lease. I read every line, every clause, every fabricated term. The room was quiet. Gloria waited. Richard watched from the far end of the table. I set the lease down gently, folded my hands in my lap, and looked directly at Gloria. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I have a question." I held that lease in my hands and I felt every Sunday dinner, every rearranged coffee maker, every time Derek said, "Just keep the peace." In foster care, you learn that peace isn't something you keep. It's something people take from you when you stop fighting for your own ground. If you've ever sat at a table where everyone expected you to fold, keep watching, because I didn't fold. I dealt. I kept my voice low. Not quiet. Low. There's a difference. Quiet is meek. Low is a decision. Gloria, I said, before we discuss this lease, I want to clarify something about the apartment at 1420 Dilworth Road. Gloria's chin lifted. What's to clarify? The property is not a Morrison family asset, I said. The deed is held by Calder Holdings LLC. That's my company. I registered it with the North Carolina Secretary of State 8 years ago. I purchased the apartment 5 years ago, in full, with funds I earned working as a CPA. The property has never been part of the Morrison Family Trust, has never been managed by you, and has never appeared on any Morrison filing. I am not your tenant, Gloria. I am the owner. The bracelet was silent. Gloria's hand had stopped moving. She held the edge of the table, and for a moment, she didn't speak. William set his fork down. Margaret looked at Richard. Paige's smirk, the one she'd carried since the first invoice dinner, was gone. Derek, to his credit, spoke. Quietly and too late. But he spoke. She's telling the truth, Mom. She showed me the deed. Gloria recovered. She always recovered. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and pivoted like a woman who'd been defending her position for 40 years. Well, she said, regardless of whose name is on what paper, this is a family discussion about family contributions. Everyone in this family contributes to. Then let's discuss family contributions, I said. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't changed my posture. I sat in my chair with my hands in my lap and waited for the room to understand that the ground had shifted beneath them. Since we're talking about contributions, I said, and who pays what, and where the money goes, I want to make sure everyone at this table understands the full picture. Gloria's eyes narrowed. This isn't about. The Morrison Family Trust holds 6 rental properties, I continued, the same way I'd present findings in an audit. Steady, factual, without inflection. 4 of those properties are generating rental income and reporting it properly to the trust account at Chase. Is that correct, Richard? Richard looked surprised to be addressed. He sat up straighter. Yes. Gloria handles the day-to-day, but yes. 6 properties. All reporting. I nodded. I let one beat of silence pass, the kind of silence that makes people lean forward. Then I said it. Gloria, can you tell Richard where the rent from 1847 Elm Street has been going for the last 8 years? Because it hasn't been going into the family trust. One sentence, delivered at the same volume I'd used to ask someone to pass the bread. The room didn't explode, it cracked. Slowly, like ice on a lake that's been warming from underneath. Richard turned to look at his wife. His face didn't show anger yet. It showed confusion. The confusion of a man who has trusted someone so completely that the idea of betrayal doesn't have a shape in his mind. Gloria, he said. Gloria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her hand went to the bracelet, the heavy gold band she'd worn every day for as long as I'd known her, and for the first time, instead of tapping it against a surface like a gavel, she held it, clutched it, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling. Paige looked at her mother. William and Margaret exchanged a glance. Derek sat frozen beside me, his hand halfway to his water glass, suspended in the air like the rest of the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The question hung there, taking up all the oxygen, and I let it. Richard said his wife's name again. Gloria. It wasn't a question anymore. It was the sound of a man beginning to understand something he didn't want to understand. Gloria tried. She turned to me first because I was the easier target. She's making things up, Gloria said. She's a foster kid with a grudge and a spreadsheet. You can't just. 1847 Elm Street, I said. Same voice, same volume, same chair. The tenants have been the Hendersons for 8 years. They pay $1,200 a month. 412 Oakwood. The Carters. $800 a month. That's $2,000 every month for 8 years that doesn't appear in anywhere in the trust's own accounting records. Richard stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the room. Gloria, he said for the 3rd time, and now his voice had weight in it. the kind of weight that only accumulates over 40 years of marriage and lands all at once. Gloria's composure cracked. Not gradually. All at once, like a pane of glass hit in the center. "How dare you?" she said, turning to me, voice rising. "You ungrateful. I built this family's properties from nothing. I deserve. You don't get to come into my family and sit at my table and—" "I didn't come into your family, Gloria," I said. I was still sitting. My hands were still folded. My voice hadn't moved an inch. "Your son married me, and I stopped needing a family to survive the day I turned 18. The line I'd said once before, in bed, to Derek, in the dark. Now I said it in the light, to the whole room, and it carried a different weight. William pushed back from the table. Margaret covered her mouth with her napkin. Paige sat perfectly still, staring at her mother with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It wasn't smugness. It wasn't anger. It was the look of a daughter realizing that the woman who told her everything had been keeping the biggest thing to herself. Richard's voice was rough now. "How much, Madeline?" I kept my eyes on the table. On the lease Gloria had printed. On the pen she'd placed beside it. "Conservatively," I said, "around $192,000 over 8 years. Richard sat down, slowly, like a man lowering himself into water that's colder than he expected. He looked at Gloria, and the way he looked at her. I'd seen that expression before. In courtrooms, in audit conference rooms, in every place where someone realizes the person they trusted was the person they should have been watching. Gloria was still standing. Her hands were shaking. The bracelet trembled against the edge of the table, a faint, metallic rattling, like something coming loose. She turned to me one last time. "You came with nothing," she said. The same words. The exact same words she'd used at the first dinner, months ago, when she'd sat at this table and told me not to confuse generosity with entitlement. I looked at her. "I built everything I have from nothing," I said. "You took what was already there, and still wanted more." The room held its breath. Derek picked up the lease agreement from the table. He looked at it. 2 pages, printed, a pen clipped to the corner. Then he tore it in half. The sound of paper splitting was the loudest thing in the room. I stood up. I smoothed my blouse. I looked at Richard because Richard was the one who deserved to hear this. "The property records are public, Richard. You can verify everything I said on the county website by Monday morning. I'd recommend hiring an independent CPA to audit the trust." Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I walked through the entryway, past the Morrison family photograph on the wall, past the credenza Gloria touched every time she entered the room, and into the Carolina evening where the air smelled like cut grass and someone else's certainty coming apart. Gloria's bracelet didn't make a sound. I drove home alone. Derek didn't follow. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing, steady and deliberate. The way you breathe when you've been holding still for a very long time and your body finally remembers it's allowed to move. At the apartment, I stepped on the cracked tile, the familiar edge of it under my bare foot after I kicked off my shoes at the door. I stood there for a moment, in the entryway of the home I'd bought with 9 years of work and a discipline about money that most people mistake for coldness. Then I made coffee. It was past 8 at night, and I didn't care. I needed the ritual. I needed the smell of it filling the kitchen, my kitchen, in my apartment, where the towels were the ones I'd chosen and the coffee maker was exactly where I'd put it. I sat at the counter. My phone buzzed on the granite. A text from Lorraine. "How did it go?" I typed back. I asked the question. Her response came in 5 seconds. "Proud of you." A text from Paige. "I didn't know." I read it. I didn't respond. A text from Derek. "I'm sorry." I read that one too. I didn't respond to that either. A text from Richard. Short. Unhurried. Like the man himself. "Thank you." I saved that one. I sat with my coffee and I drank it this time. All of it, down to the last warm swallow. in a kitchen where every surface was exactly where I'd placed it. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I sat with the particular quiet of a woman who had just said the hardest true thing she'd ever said and was now sitting in the space that truth had opened up. A week later, Richard hired an independent CPA. Not me. I recused myself immediately from a firm in South Charlotte to audit the Morrison Family Trust. The audit took 3 weeks. When the findings came back, the number was $187,400. Slightly less than my estimate, but close enough that the difference didn't matter. Nearly $200,000 in rental income from 2 properties, diverted over 8 years into a personal credit union account bearing Gloria's name alone. Richard didn't press criminal charges. He told Derek it was a family matter. Ironic words, given how Gloria had used that same phrase to silence me at her table. But he acted. He removed Gloria as property manager for all 6 units and hired a licensed management company. He changed the trust's operating account. He consulted his own attorney, not Harold Brennan, someone new, about restructuring the trust to require annual third-party audits. Gloria didn't go to jail. She went somewhere quieter than that. She lost the keys to the properties. She lost the leather folder. She lost the seat at the head of the table where she directed Morrison family business for 2 decades. The bracelet still sat on her wrist, but it didn't clink the same way against surfaces that were no longer hers to patrol. Paige called me once, 3 weeks after the dinner. "I'm sorry I called you a foster kid playing house," she said. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I was a foster kid," I said. "I was playing for keeps. We aren't friends." But the hostility ended. The current between us went from sharp to neutral, like a wire that's been disconnected from its source. Derek moved out of my apartment 2 weeks after the dinner. We separated. Not with rage, not with thrown dishes or screaming matches. With the tired, heavy recognition that he had spent 35 years choosing the wrong person to be loyal to, and I had spent 5 months waiting for him to choose differently. I don't hate Gloria. I understand her, and that's harder. She grew up in a trailer park in Georgia with a father who fixed pipes and a mother who stretched a paycheck until it tore. She married Richard Morrison at 22 because he was steady and kind and had a house with a front door that locked. She spent 40 years building a portfolio of properties so she'd never have to depend on luck again. And when her husband got sick, she panicked. She started taking money, not for greed, not for luxury, but for the same reason I kept an LLC in my birth name, because she was terrified of going back to having nothing. I know that fear. I carry it in my own chest, in the cracked tile by my door, in the spreadsheet I opened before I knew what the fight was. The difference is that I built my floor with my own hands. Gloria built hers on top of someone else's, and when the weight of it finally came down, it fell on the people who trusted her most. The safest home you'll ever have is the one no one can claim but you, not because you're selfish, but because you're worth protecting. A fake invoice on a dinner plate, a gold bracelet that stopped clinking, one question about rent that nobody could answer. If you've ever protected something you built with your own hands, or if you're still learning how, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and come back for the next one. This was Calm Drama Stories.